This is a 100% true story. Now imagine this. A struggling mother had only one wish. She wanted to bring home some meat so her little son could finally enjoy a proper meal. Her son waited patiently because she had promised him, "I'll be home tonight with dinner." But she never came home. What really happened to her that night? Who took her life? And why has this mystery remained unsolved for so many years? This story is more than just a chilling mystery. At its heart is the heartbreaking love of a mother who did everything she could for her child, only for that promise to remain forever unfulfilled. Make sure you watch this video until the very end. The final moments reveal details that may completely change the way you see this haunting case. If you enjoy true mystery stories like this, please leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more real-life mysteries and unexplained cases. I hope you're all doing well. Welcome to today's episode. Today's story is based on a real paranormal account. It is both deeply emotional and incredibly unsettling, and it's a story you won't soon forget. If you have experienced a true unexplained event, or you've heard a credible story from someone you trust, we'd love to hear it. Stories shared by our viewers are what make this series possible. For privacy, the names and locations in this story have been changed from West Virginia. She heard this story from the grandmother of one of her students. The events are believed to have taken place around 2001, when many rural communities still had limited access to electricity. Back then, kerosene lanterns were a normal part of everyday life after sunset. The main person in this story was a man named Daniel Brooks, though everyone in town simply called him Dan. Dan lived in a small farming community in rural West Virginia. He was a hard-working but poor farmer who shared a modest home with his wife and his elderly parents. One day, a local town official approached Dan with an offer. He was asked to work as the night watchman for the town's small marketplace, making rounds after dark to keep an eye on the stores. The job would provide some much-needed extra income. Without much hesitation, Dan accepted. His plan was simple. He would work on his farm during the day and patrol the marketplace at night. His family, however, strongly disagreed. His parents and his wife begged him not to take the job. "We may not have much," they told him, "but we're getting by. It's not worth risking your life for a little extra money." But Dan was a man who always kept his word. Once he made a commitment, he wasn't the type to back out. But Dan was a courageous man who believed that his word meant something. Calmly, he replied, "I've already given my word. I can't back out now." Deep down, he told himself, "I'll give it a try for a while. If anything feels wrong, I can always quit later." Reluctantly, his family accepted his decision. For nearly 2 months, everything went smoothly. Then, one evening, after finishing dinner, he left home a little later than usual. He carried an old kerosene lantern, a sturdy wooden club, and a whistle hanging from his belt. After checking each of the stores, he walked over to the large oak tree where he often took short breaks during his shift. Just as he sat down, he heard a strange noise. He raised the lantern and scanned the area, but there was nothing there. At first, he assumed it was just a stray cat or another animal moving through the darkness. A few moments later, the sound came again. This time, it was unmistakable. It sounded like a woman quietly crying. Gripping his wooden club, Dan slowly followed the sound. It was coming from the back of the marketplace, near the row of butcher shops. He passed one building after another before stepping into a narrow alley. It was a warm summer night, and the bright moonlight made it easy enough to see where he was going. The farther he walked, the louder the crying became. Then, he stopped. Standing only a short distance away was a woman unlike anything he had ever seen. Large sections of her skin and flesh appeared to be decayed, exposing bone beneath. Strips of rotting flesh hung loosely from her body. Her arms looked almost skeletal, and much of the flesh around her jaw had disappeared, leaving her teeth fully exposed. A sickening stench of decay filled the air. The sight was so horrifying that Dan felt his entire body freeze. In all his years, he had never imagined he would witness something so terrifying. Terror swept over Dan. He was certain that if he stayed there for even one more second, he would die. He quickly slipped behind the metal wall of a nearby shop, turned the flame of his lantern down until it was barely visible, and held his breath as he watched the horrifying figure. What he witnessed next became the most terrifying moment of his life. The woman knelt in front of one of the butcher shops, slowly licking the dried blood from the ground. Then she moved from one shop to the next, running her tongue across the large wooden chopping blocks where fresh meat had been cut earlier that day. She seemed determined not to leave a single drop of blood behind. Dan couldn't believe what he was seeing. His heart pounded violently. His vision blurred, and overwhelming fear took over. Before he even realized what was happening, everything went black. The next afternoon, Dan finally regained consciousness. He opened his eyes to find his entire family gathered around his bed. His wife, struggling to hold back tears, told him that just after sunrise, several local residents had found him lying unconscious near the marketplace and carried him home. They had spent hours trying to wake him, but nothing had worked. Until now. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, but Dan wasn't sure himself. He kept asking himself the same question over and over. Did I really see that? Or was it nothing more than a nightmare? In the end, he chose not to tell anyone what he had witnessed. He knew that if his family heard the truth, they would never allow him to work another night at the marketplace. Besides, if he quit in the middle of the month, he would lose the wages he had already earned. So he convinced himself it had all been caused by exhaustion, or perhaps an unusually vivid dream. The following night, Dan returned to work as usual. This time, however, he came prepared. Along with his wooden club, he carried a solid iron rod. He patrolled the entire marketplace several times. Everything appeared completely normal. Eventually, he returned to the old oak tree and sat down. To keep himself awake, he began eating the dry snacks he had packed from home. Then, he heard it again. The same woman crying. But this time, it was much louder. Mixed with the sobbing was a deep, guttural growl, a sound that was almost impossible to describe. Slowly, Dan stood up. Tightening his grip on the iron rod, he followed the sound once again. He returned to the exact spot where he had hidden the night before and quietly positioned himself behind the metal wall of the shop. He needed to know the truth. Had he really witnessed something supernatural? Or had it all been a nightmare? A few moments later, the horrifying figure appeared again. She looked exactly as she had the night before. Her body was covered in decaying flesh. Bones protruded through torn skin, and the overwhelming smell of decay filled the air. She wandered from one butcher shop to another, licking the dried blood from the ground. Then Dan witnessed something even more horrifying. The woman lowered her head and began tearing strips of rotting flesh from her own leg with her teeth, slowly chewing them as if she felt no pain at all. Suddenly, she stopped. It was as if she had sensed that someone was watching her. Slowly, she turned and began walking toward the metal wall where Dan was hiding. Dan tightened his grip on the iron rod and silently prayed. His entire body had gone numb with fear. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't force himself to move. Then, in the blink of an eye, she leaped over the barrier and landed directly in front of him. Their eyes met. A twisted, unnatural smile spread across her face. Thick saliva dripped from the corners of her mouth as she stared at him without blinking. Then, in a low, raspy whisper, she said, "It's been so long since I've tasted human flesh. Would you give me a little of yours?" The moment Dan heard his scream brought his mother, his wife, and his younger brother rushing outside. They found him lying unconscious in the yard. They carried him inside as quickly as they could. His clothes were completely soaked with sweat. His wife changed his shirt and stayed by his side, trying to cool him down. Hours later, Dan finally opened his eyes. The first thing he asked for was a glass of water. Once he had recovered enough to speak, his family demanded to know what had happened. At first, they assumed he had been attacked by robbers or violent criminals. After all, this was the second night in a row that he had returned home unconscious, and they couldn't think of any other explanation. This time, Dan hid nothing. He told them everything. From the strange crying he had heard the previous night, to the horrifying woman, to the terrifying words she had whispered just moments before chasing him. For the first time, Dan didn't argue. That very night, a high fever took hold of him. The following morning, Dan's younger brother visited the local church and told Father Michael everything that had happened. Later that afternoon, Father Michael came to see Dan. Dan was still burning with fever, while his wife sat beside him, gently placing cool, damp cloths on his forehead. After listening carefully, Father Michael spoke in a calm voice. "There are things in this world that we cannot always explain. Whatever you encountered, God protected you from something truly dangerous. Be grateful for that." He prayed over Dan and offered him one final piece of advice. Leave this job behind. Go back to farming. You may earn less, but you'll have something far more valuable: your safety. Dan quietly nodded. "My family warned me from the very beginning," he said. "This time, I'm going to listen to them." Within a few days, news of Dan's terrifying experience had spread throughout the town. One afternoon, an elderly businessman named Walter Hayes came to visit him. Walter had owned a shop in the marketplace for decades. After listening to Dan's story, Walter sat in silence for a long moment. Then he finally spoke. "What you saw isn't something new," he said quietly. "People have been talking about something like that in that marketplace for many years." Everyone in the room fell silent. Walter took a deep breath and began telling a story that few people had ever heard in full. About 12 years ago, there was a woman named Anna Miller who lived here in town. She worked at a nearby grain processing facility to support her family. At home, she cared for her young son, her elderly mother-in-law, and her husband, who had been paralyzed for years. Since he couldn't work, the responsibility of providing for the family fell entirely on Anna and her mother-in-law. One day, Anna's little boy begged her to bring home some beef for dinner. She smiled and promised him that after work, she would stop by the marketplace and bring some home. After finishing her shift, Anna went straight to the butcher shop. But when she counted the money in her pocket, she realized she didn't have enough. She explained her situation to the butcher. Feeling sorry for her, he said, "Come back just before I close. Whatever beef is left, I'll sell it to you at a much lower price. You won't have to pay the full amount." Relieved, Anna thanked him and decided to wait at the marketplace until the end of the day. The hours passed slowly. To pass the time, she wandered around the marketplace while the sun gradually disappeared below the horizon. As darkness settled in, she returned to the butcher shop. "Please," she said, "my little boy is waiting for me. I promised I'd bring dinner home." The butcher apologized. "Just a little longer," he replied. "We just received another large order. As soon as it's finished, I'll have plenty of beef left. and I'll let you have it at the discounted price." Anna sighed. "If only I had a little more money," she thought. "My son wouldn't have to wait so long." Just then, a neighbor named Samuel Carter spotted her. "Anna?" he asked. "You're still here? It's getting late. Aren't you heading home?" Anna explained everything. The butcher repeated his promise that she only needed to wait a little longer. Samuel nodded. "All right," he said. "I'm heading toward your neighborhood anyway. I'll let your family know you're on your way home with dinner." Anna smiled softly. "Please tell my son not to fall asleep," she said. "Tell him I'm bringing dinner home." Samuel nodded and left. On his way home, he stopped by Anna's house and delivered her message to the family. But as the night grew later, Anna never came home. Her little boy kept asking the same heartbreaking question: "When is Mom coming home?" Even her bedridden husband became increasingly worried. Finally, Anna's elderly mother-in-law grabbed a kerosene lantern and asked the neighbors for help. Together, they searched through the marketplace, the nearby roads, and even the grain processing facility where Anna worked. They searched all night. She was nowhere to be found. The following morning, the family reported her disappearance to the local authorities. The police immediately opened an investigation. Their first suspect was the butcher, since he was the last known person to see Anna alive. But the butcher insisted that Anna had eventually collected her beef and left the marketplace. Several witnesses confirmed his story, saying they had seen her walking away with a package of meat in her hands. The investigation continued. Days passed. Nearly a week went by, and there was still no sign of Anna. Then, one morning, a farmer walked toward a small irrigation pump house near one of the fields. Before he even reached it, he stopped. A terrible smell filled the air. At first, he assumed a wild animal had died nearby. But as he searched for the source of the odor, he noticed a large burlap sack lying behind the pump house. Dark reddish stains covered parts of the fabric. Something didn't feel right. No one dared touch it. The authorities were called immediately. When the police arrived, they carefully opened the sack. The moment they looked inside, everyone froze. Inside was the body of Anna Miller. Her clothing confirmed her identity, but her face and body had decomposed so badly that she was almost impossible to recognize. The smell was overwhelming. When the news reached her family, Anna's mother-in-law rushed to the scene. Her young son was at school and had no idea what had happened. The entire town was devastated. Everyone kept asking the same question: who could have done something so cruel to an innocent woman? The police continued investigating, but they never found any solid evidence. The butcher was questioned repeatedly, yet his story never changed. Anna had picked up the beef and left the marketplace. What happened after that? He simply didn't know. Even the medical examiner was unable to provide many answers. The condition of Anna's body made it impossible to determine exactly how she had died. After the necessary procedures were completed, her remains were returned to the family, and she was laid to rest in a simple funeral. But the story didn't end with Anna's funeral. About 6 months later, strange reports began spreading throughout the town. Night watchmen working around the old marketplace claimed they had seen a horrifying woman wandering near the butcher shops after midnight. Her body appeared to be covered in rotting flesh, and witnesses said she would kneel down and lick the dried blood from the ground outside the butcher stalls. Some believed it was Anna's restless spirit. Others dismissed the stories as nothing more than local folklore. But Dan wasn't the only one who claimed to have seen her.
Both before and after his encounter, several night watchmen reported witnessing the same terrifying figure. Some were so shaken by what they experienced that they quit their jobs and never returned. To this day, no one knows the truth. Was there really something supernatural haunting that old marketplace? Or was there another explanation that no one has ever uncovered? The answer remains a mystery. But perhaps the most heartbreaking part of this story has nothing to do with ghosts. It is the story of a mother who worked tirelessly for one simple reason: to keep a promise to her little boy. She wanted nothing more than to bring home a small package of beef so her son could enjoy a proper dinner. That promise was never fulfilled. Perhaps that unfinished promise is the reason this story has never been forgotten. Even today, no one knows who killed Anna Miller or what truly happened to her that night. The investigation went nowhere. Years passed, memories faded, but the unanswered questions remained. Some local residents still claim that, late at night, a terrifying woman can occasionally be seen near the old butcher shops. Some say it's only an old legend. Others believe something far darker still lingers there. No one can say for certain. So what do you think? Was Dan's experience, along with the accounts from the other night watchmen, simply the result of fear and imagination? Or did they witness something that defies explanation? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next true mystery. This was today's first story.